I've read all the history books about this, and this raid, Kirkenes raid, only gets the very, very slightest mention in any book about the Fleet Air Arm. I wonder why. It was a complete and utter disaster. There was no need for it, as it was only 12 miles from Russia. It had to be a pure propaganda raid, you know, support of Russia and that sort of thing. The Secret Service or whoever were way out of line in the fact that they said it was mass shipping and there would be no fighter opposition. And once again, to show the stupidity of sending aircraft like Swordfish and Albacores, I learned afterwards that our fighter escort was 3 Fulmars, which were rubbish anyway as fighters, but they were the only one the Fleet Air Arm had in those days. And of those 3, they got tangled up with one another, and one of those got shot down.
There were 2 carriers up there, the Victorious and the Furious. And we raided Petsamo, and the Victorious raided Kirkenes. Apart from damage to the aircraft, no one was lost or killed. And unfortunately, from the Victorious, I think they lost 17 aircraft. They were shot out of the sky.
They decided to form a squadron of walruses who could be shore-based in Norway to provide anti-submarine patrols, reconnaissance and all the rest of it. So they formed this squadron, 701 Squadron, and I was made the squadron CO. And we were shore-based there at a place called Harstad. And there was a bogus report that the German parachute troops had landed at a place called Kirkenes, which is in the very north of Norway. It's practically touching Russia. And there's a great big harbour up there. So the Earl of Kirkenes, who's the commander-in-chief, sent for me. He said, well, we've got to establish one way or the other. And he said, I want you to go up there. So I flew up there. And, of course, it was completely untrue. The Norwegians fired on us, but it was all right. They didn't hit us, and in the end, it was all very amicable. When we came back from Norway, of course, as the squadron CO, I wrote a report, and in it I said how I'd been to this place, Kirkenes, and there's a very big iron ore mine there. I suggested if the Germans used it, we should do a torpedo attack on the ships in the harbour.
Two days after Finland regrettably decided to throw in her lot with the Nazis in their fight against the Soviet, the Fleet Air Arm went north. The aircraft carriers Furious and Victorious took their planes to within striking distance of Finland's ice-free port of Petsamo, right on the Soviet frontier. There was a strong escort which carried out its part of anti-submarine practice on the way.
I was sent as the senior observer of a new torpedo bomber squadron, 827. I was pulled out of the squadron. I was in charge of cockpit design of all single-seater aircraft, RAF and naval. and I was sitting in my office, and the telephone rang, and that I was to report to the Admiralty immediately, where the Vice Chief of the Naval Staff wanted to see me. I was only a lieutenant, and I thought, good God, what have I done wrong? And However, I got in a taxi and went there, and I was taken in to see the great man. And anyway, the Vice Chief of Naval Staff said, Winston Churchill says we've got to do something to assist the Russians. And other than bombing Germany by the RAF, there's nothing we can do. The only plan that exists is your plan to attack Kirkenes, which the Germans are now using as their main base in North Norway for attacking towards Murmansk. And I'd forgotten all about this. We said we're going to send 2 carriers up there to carry out the attack, and you're to go up there to sort of navigate and generally assist.
I got made a petty officer, and I formed a brand new squadron with aircraft called Albacores. Now, at that time, a lot of hoo-ha went on about these Albacores to supersede the Swordfish, but all they were, it was covered in swordfish. You had a cowling over the 2 back seats, which you could lift up the same as a modern fighter pilot's hood. So you had it up, open for takeoff and landing, and you had it down when you were flying. So it did keep some of the wind off you. But that was the only difference between a Swordfish and an Albacore.
A lot of training was done doing low flying over the islands of the Sound, and you know, all things you associate with a big raid. Nobody said anything, nobody told anybody anything, but obviously something big was on. And eventually it came. The Victorious came round, and we embarked. In fact, the worst thing that happened to us was at that stage, Lieutenant Commander Stokes was promoted to commander flying and appointed to HMS Eagle, which was in the Mediterranean. So we lost our CO. And that one movement of removing a pilot from heading the squadron and substituting an observer as CO of the squadron necessitated 7 aircraft crew changes. Now, I've never seen anybody admit to this cock-up in any publication. I've got the official report from, the top brass. That stupid movement, you destroy the integration of a fully trained squadron with 7 changes. And in fact, my pal Jeff Griffin, who was flying in 4M, and was shot down and taken prisoner of war, only met his pilot, who was the replacement for Commander Stokes, as he walked out to his aircraft to take off. And this is, I can't understand it. The intelligence of whoever organised this. I had no time for the Vice Admiral in charge, Wake Walker. 2 squadrons, or nearly 3 squadrons, were destroyed in a stupid act like that. No wonder our losses were so bad.
So in July, we embarked on the Victorious, a brand new carrier. We called in at Sedgefield in Iceland to refuel. It was a fleet anchorage in Iceland. Incidentally, the Icelandic people didn't like us very much, the Royal Navy. I think it's more or less because we had occupied Iceland at that time. Anyway, away we go again. By now the Furious has joined up with the Victorious, and 2 cruisers. I think one was the Dorsetshire, and I think the other one was the Sussex, and a destroyer escort.
So I was flown up to Scapa Flow and embarked in HMS Victorious and rejoined my own old squadron, 827. There were 2 squadrons of Albacores and 1 squadron of 2-seater fighters, Fairey Fulmars. In the Furious, there were 2 squadrons of Swordfish, a squadron of Fulmars, and a squadron of Sea Hurricanes. It was the first time they'd had Sea Hurricanes. Well, we sailed from Scapa Flow, and first of all we went up to Iceland to fuel our destroyers, and one of our escorting destroyers ran into one of our own minefields and had her bows blown off, which was a good start. And then we moved across, and the weather was very bad.
And it was common knowledge to all of us in the squadron saying, what the bloody hell are we doing what we're doing now? And that is, in a strike force, heading north, open sea, Norway occupied, Sweden occupied, everything occupied by the Germans. So where do they think we're going? To the North Pole? You know, it was so ridiculous. We've lost a destroyer already, and, you know, that took 2 days to get up to Sedgwick and refuel, and then we started heading round for Kirkenes. Well, you're going round the whole length of Norway. And did they honestly think, they blame was on Churchill partly, but what about the Sea Lord? He surely had enough knowledge of the Navy and the geography of, you can't take a task force around that area of land and not be seen by somebody. And the Germans were no ruddy fools.
Then, in position for the attack, the aircraft took off. Fighters, bombers and torpedo-carrying planes, Fulmars, Albacores and Swordfish in plenty. If at any time the Nazis or the Finns thought that Britain would be unable to link up her offensive with the Soviets' magnificent effort, here's where they got their first big surprise.
It was arranged that the Victorious's aircraft would attack the Germans at Kirkenes, and the Swordfish from the Furious was going to attack the Germans at Petsamo, which was, of course, then in Finland. And the Victorious's aircraft, we were to, of course, go in low, and the fighters were to go in low and then go up and try and protect us and also attack the airfield.
I wasn't at the briefing. No air gunners were attended, so we didn't know what were the tactics going to be. We were just like lambs going to a ruddy slaughter.
By now, we're talking about 1941, 2 years after the war started, somebody decided that it might be a good idea if the telegraphist air gunners were put in the picture as to what was going on. So we did attend the briefing for this raid. And the raid was 827 and 828 Squadron, all Albacores, with 9 aircraft each squadron. We would go in and we would attack Kirkenes, near the North Cape, and we would torpedo the mass shipping gathered there. Now, Kirkenes is only 12 miles from Russia. 12 miles. And we've gone all this way, all these ships, to do a raid that the Russians could have done before breakfast. Now, was it propaganda? Was it political or not? Anyway, we're told to go in and attack this mass shipping. Meanwhile, the Furious aircraft would attack Petsamo in Finland, which is even nearer to the Russian border. But Finland at that time, I believe, was occupied by the Russians. So we're also told that we'll meet very little fighter opposition because the Germans have only got training aircraft up there in the far north, and that there's a hospital ship between us and the shore, and that we are not to attack it.
Anyway, we got up on deck and all the engines were lining up and you could see a couple of miles. And then there was one of those very small changes of temperature you get in the Arctic, and suddenly you could see 100 miles. And as we were forming up, having taken off, we could see one of the ships was firing on a German reconnaissance aircraft, so the Germans had sighted us.
The aircraft were lined up to take off from the Victorias. We were all aware of the fact that the force had been spotted. Obviously, I mean, you can't go all the way around flipping coast and not be seen. So we were committed to go. There has been rumours since that the CO, this observer that had taken over from Commander Stokes, should have cancelled it out then. But I don't doubt for one moment he was overridden by the Rear Admiral who was CO of the whole operation. So I looked at Sir Prendergast and I said, right, we're in for it this time. We were in the second senior flight, 4K. So A, B and C and F, G and H would take off before us. Then our turn. Got airborne and settled down for the flight in. We were at about, I suppose, 500 feet. As we approached the coast, we were aware that there was a hospital ship at the entrance to the Kirkenes harbour. Obviously, they were telling their authorities what we were up to, and still we pressed on.
So, we get airborne, we see this hospital ship, and I don't like this at all. I mean, what's to stop the hospital ship radioing to shore? Anyway, eventually we get to the field leading into Kirkenes. Incidentally, we're flying as three-seaters this time. In other words, pilot, observer and tag. So we went in one side of Kirkenes Bay and 827 Squadron went in the other side. And all of a sudden, there's flaming onions and God knows what coming down at us. Because we're flying up the field and the Germans are firing down from the cliffs with light attack. Not funny at all.
Anyway, we flew in low despite that, and we were approaching the target, but unfortunately the squadron commander of 827 Squadron was an observer, and he wouldn't let me fly in the lead aircraft because he said, I'm the CO and I'm going to fly in the leading aircraft. So I was in one of the sub-flight leaders' aircraft further back. And as we approached the target, I saw them turn and I knew they were flying up the wrong field. So I absolutely roared at my pilot, and finally I forced him. I said, we're going to the wrong place, for Christ's sake. Eventually he broke off And he and two subflights and the other squadron, 828 squadron, we all went straight in to the right field. The other lot realised the mistake later and then came across, but of course they'd lost a lot of time.
So we go in so far, and we have to climb over the end of the fjord because it was a sort of nearly a dead end. We have to climb over the mountain and down into the bay. And there's all this mass shipping, about 4 little ships. And before anything can happen, there are 110s and Stukas all over the place. They're all airborne. They haven't just got up there. They're there waiting for us. And they start, by now the light attack has stopped firing. They've left it to the Stukas and the 110s. And they're blasting away with cannon shells and God knows what. Well, almost immediately, my last subflight all got shot down. That was KL&M. I saw them go down. Everybody jettisoned their torpedoes. And I say jettisoned. Nobody got a chance to fire at any ship. You could sort of see over the other side of the bay, 827 Squadron, getting the same treatment. So anyway, I'm flying with the CO on this trip, because I'm the petty officer of the squadron. And we turned about and went out the way we came in.
We were aware that 828 Squadron was bearing to the right, which would have taken them to the harbour entrance. 8 aircraft went through the approach into the harbour. The German gunners were firing down at them. So, you know, it was a trap. We, all the 9 aircraft behind the leader, just followed him down the fjord, which was to the east of Kirkenes harbour. Low level. When we got to the end of this fjord, of course, we had to go up to get over the top, and I can remember seeing some people from a farmhouse waving to us as we flashed over about 100 feet, and then, of course, we dropped down into the harbour. Standing on the stirrups at the back of the aircraft, I was able to look forward and see something of what was going on. Obviously, there was a lot of puffs of smoke, etc., etc. As we dropped down, I was aware of a Panzer-type vehicle on the cliffside on one side, which I gave a short, sharp burst of fire to them. But with a single gun, you can't do very much about it. And then, of course, the pilot, Fairey Albacores, as we called him, was trying to find a target, because there wasn't any target. We'd been told this was a massive ferry shipping. And all I could see is one merchant ship with its propeller thrashing away, obviously in ballast.
Well, we flew in, and as we came through the gap, and there, immediately in front of us, was this German gunnery training ship called the Bremser. And we dived down, and the pilot dropped the torpedo, and we turned towards the entrance of the fjord to get back to the ship. And I looked back, and I saw the torpedo go right under the Bremser without exploding. And I should explain that these torpedoes were fitted with a thing called a duplex head, because if a torpedo is set to hit the side of a ship, a lot of the force of the explosion just goes straight up, lifts some water up, but goes straight up in the air. But if you have a magnetically operated torpedo head, when it gets under the ship and registers the ship's magnetism, it goes under the ship. The explosion occurs under the ship, and it does much more damage. But we pointed out before we took off that there's this big iron ore mine up there, and it was absurd doing this, putting this duplex. They should have been set to hit.
And of course, by this time, my pilot had obviously got down to torpedo dropping height. I don't know what his target was. It's impossible in an albacore to see what you're aiming for because you've got the fuel tank and the pilot's seat in front of you. But I was aware of the torpedo being dropped because we shot upwards pretty rapidly with the loss of the weight. And then I was aware that we were being shot at. And, of course, the pilot by this time had done a split-arse turn and was making for the high ground again to get into the fjord. I had another go at one machine gun post, but again, we were junking around so violently that there was no effect at all, really.
We went in, and then we came back up sort of the harbour, and there was the shore batteries firing at us. I remember coming out, these German guns firing at us, and I was firing back at them with the .303 we had in the aircraft, but not that would have done much damage to them, but it felt good to be firing at them. Well, we were raiding the docks, etc., but whether we did much damage, I don't suppose anybody could sort of report back to what damage was done. I think there were one or two ships in there that were probably damaged alongside the quays, but...
Looking over the top main plane forward, I could see that there was obviously a fight going on at the far end of Kirkenes harbour, which I think was the gunboat. I forget the name of this German vessel. There was other pockets of puffs of smoke, etc.
My two followed me, B and C. They followed me out the field. I think one of the third sub-flight got shot down, but I didn't see any more of them. Anyway, when we got to the entrance to the field, the CO I was flying with took us out on one bearing, and the other two, B and C, they were being chased by 110s, and they were forced to go away to starboard. And I watched both of them get shot down in flames. So that's the third sub-flight's gone, that's K, L and M, and B and C's gone now.
Anyway, we succeeded in evacuating the main harbour defences, and we were dropping down to the fjord that we'd come down. Now, everything was beautiful then, but as we approached the entrance to that fjord that we'd come down and were now going backwards, high in the sky there was, I remember to this day, a terrible circle of aeroplanes, and they were circling and picking off our aircraft as they ventured out of the fjord. So A, B and C and F, G and H took the full brunt of exiting from that fjord.
The two that shot down B and C then had a go at me. And they were ranging on us from about 1,000 yards with their cannons. And the only protection you had in albacores or swordfish was to go down on the water and wait, see the cannon shells hitting the water, and at the last second yell out to the pilot, harder starboard, harder port, with which, you know, he spun left or right and the cannon shells went by you. That was the theory. In this case, it worked. And they didn't hit us. But I did see the cannon shells going by. I think one of them turned away, and two of them did one attack, and then one turned away. Then the other one did one more attack, and he came practically up alongside and then turned away. I think they must have run out of ammunition. So we flogged on back to the ship.
Fairey Albacores, I shouldn't call him this, it's unfair. Our pilot immediately headed for the far bank of the fjord that we were coming out, and he headed right for it, no mucking around. And when he got near it, he then banked, and he stuck all the time to that position. Not going up or going down, he just maintained that position, which enabled Prendergast to do the monitoring. We had a very tight drill. Prendergast, the observer, did, for want of a better word, fire direction. He stood up with his back to the fuel tank, looking for anything that was making a pass at us. Whatever angle that aircraft was approaching us, I would get a tap on the shoulder if it was at that side. If it was something down below, he'd tap my leg on the side responsible, where I would immediately swing the gun to. And using this method of ranging the aircraft, we had agreed that if attacked, the pilot would go straight and steady. There's nothing he could do otherwise. If he did that, then Prendergast could range anybody approaching us, as long as it was behind us. If there was anything in front of us, well, then that was the pilot's responsibility. But Prendergast indicated as best he could where I should concentrate. And I'd then use the gun sight to range the aircraft. If it was a ME-109, at 500 yards it should only occupy half of my ring sight. And I would open fire at the aircraft to the best of my ability. When I got to the aircraft's wingspan filling the whole of the diameter, I stopped firing, and that was the indication to Prendergast to tell the pilot to do a 180 degree turn, left or right, whatever it is. Now, every time we evaded our enemy, purely turning at the right time. If we'd turn too early, then you're a sitting duck. If you turn too late, and it was simple. But it needed everybody to do what was required.
But I do remember the fighters on board, I think, were Fairey Fulmars in those days. They were a two-seater fighter. And coming back to the carrier, one of these Fulmars went down into the sea. And the crew was still alive, and as we passed over them, we just waved to them. I mean, we couldn't do anything else.
Right, now, we evaded, I forget, I've got the number. Numbers don't matter. We evaded our enemy. The pilot was given a gift. Coming over the high cliffs was a Junkers 87. Now, I noticed that there was no gun projecting from the rear cabin of this Junkers 87. So I thought, right, they've got no gunner. So he's open meat for us. Anyway, this stupid so-and-so was so intent on going for an albacore in front of us that he ignored the fact that underneath his left wing was us. And he dropped and dropped until he then started to move across our front. And all Tony had to do was lift his gun sights up, 28 shots, and he shot him down. Beautiful. couldn't have been better.
Anyway, we started going out of the harbour, and then a Messerschmitt 110, that's a two-seater German fighter, got on our tail, and he made about 6 passes at us because we kept turning inside him. But we weren't going anywhere, or very, very little distance. And then finally a cannon shell hit the rudder, and we crashed into the sea from a height of about 200 feet. And I was flung out of the rear cockpit and went through the air for about 100 yards or so and landed in the sea. And then when I surfaced, I looked back and I saw the pilot and air gunner being able to get out. And then after about 20 minutes, a German minesweeper came and picked us up.
When we got back to the ship, we couldn't land on. Oh, by now, 2 of the second subflight have sort of joined up very loosely with me. So there's 3 of us at the 9. And we couldn't land on then because there was an aircraft on the flight deck, bent in 2, broken its back on landing. And we found out afterwards he hadn't broken his back. He was just shot in 2, and the leg-fist air gunner was dead in the back. He'd been cut in 2, more or less, by cannon shells. So while we were circling, there was 5 of 827 came back. Now one of them, don't forget these are biplanes, one of them, a bloke named Dilnut, his lower main plane was just flapping in the breeze. It was in tatters and streamers where he'd been shot up. Anyway, eventually we landed and we found that the casualty list was 6 of 827 had gone for Burton out of the 9. 5 of 828 had gone out of the 9. 1 was smashed up on deck. So out of the 18 aircraft that went, only 6 came back, of which 1 never flew again. And of the aircrew that went, which was 54, only 22 came back out of 54. While all this is going on with us to Kirkenes, the Furious aircraft had gone into Petsamo, found no ships whatsoever there, and they'd loosed their torpedoes at the wharfs. They met no opposition of any sort, possibly because this was Finland, and they all came back.
Right, so Prendergast immediately then worked out roughly a course to get back to the carrier. I turned the beacon on and tuned in. As we were heading for home, we passed over a dinghy from one of the fighters that had been shot down. We waved to them and we reported it immediately that there was a crew there. We found out afterwards that the Admiral refused point blank for his rating pilot in the Walrus on his ship, the Dorsetshire, absolutely refused him permission to go and pick him up. So, you know, just because he didn't want, I suppose, to be attacked himself.
Well, I mean, you're on a high, I suppose, but when you get back, and you get back in one piece, that's it. You just thank heavens you are back and no one's really been lost. In fact, we had a shell exploded between the upper and lower main plane, which damaged it so badly that when we got back on board, the whole starboard main plane had to be replaced. It was damaged so badly. So I suppose we were really lucky that we didn't end up in the harbour.
So we got back to the ship safely. We hung back because, being undamaged, we let the damaged aircraft land. There were some pretty nasty ones too. 4A, which was Cocky Reed was the senior pilot, and the CO was the observer, and Jackie Lambert was the air gunner. The air gunner was able to zog a message to the bridge as to what was wrong with him, because he didn't dare fire his gun because they received a direct hit in their fuel tank with a 110 shell, but it didn't explode. But the qualities of the anti-leak of the big fuel tank was inadequate to the size of the hole. So the CO was wearing a Sidcuit suit, stuffed his top of his elbow into this hole and saved the fuel, and they were managed to get back to the ship. So Jackie Lambert couldn't do any WT, because one spark and they'd have been blown to smithereens. So he zogged the message to the ship, and the ship immediately turned into wind, and they were the first to land. The aircraft was immediately pushed back and over the stern. The CO suffered very serious high-octane fuel burns, but he saved his aircraft. But we, in the third subflight, KL&M, K was us. We got back to the ship in one piece and could claim one aircraft. L, who was following us, received a 109 burst from astern and under the aircraft, which decapitated the air gunner on its way up, but the whole burst buried itself in the wing roots of the upper main plane. The dinghy flew out and things like that, but they managed to stagger back to the ship with the dead air gunner. When it landed on, and we were watching this, the two wings just flopped, fell off. And what had been keeping them going was the uplift of the wings. So the body of the air gunner was immediately removed, and the aircraft again was struck down into the hangar, because to get his body out, that's the only way they could do it. And of course you can imagine what it was like in the back of the aircraft. Anyway, then that was dispersed with. M got shot down. Both the pilot and the air gunner were wounded and taken prisoner of war. And P, Q, and R, they were all right. They were damaged. They had several bullet holes in their wings and their fuselage, but they made it back.
And we were taken back into the harbour alongside this ship, the Bremser, and we were stark naked with blankets round us, and the German captain came down in his white suit with his dirk and gave us a big salute and said, "Bad luck, gentlemen, your torpedo went under my ship without exploding." We were then taken ashore, and we had a sort of very brief interrogation, and then we were taken to the main interrogation camp at a place called Dulag Luft. Well, that was very depressing. When this attack, when we were being attacked by this Messerschmitts, and when we crashed and so on, to be honest, I didn't feel very frightened at all. There was so much going on, and I was trying to talk to the pilot, telling him when to turn and all this, and looking around. But, it was once we'd been picked up and were taken back alongside the Bremser, then the depression really set in then.
Both Petsamo and Kirkenes were attacked. A Nazi warship and other vessels were destroyed or damaged, wharves and jetties smashed, oil tanks set on fire, and a number of Nazi planes shot down. Though naturally we had losses, the Fleet Air Arm, bringing swift aid to the Soviet, won a brilliant success.
So, as you can imagine, it was a rather traumatic evening. We all got our extra tough tot of rum. I was called over the tannoy to report to the wardroom, where I went to, and my pilot and my observer were there, and we were all congratulating each other about how we'd got back. And I said, we got back because we had a good drill, which I think the point was taken. But I had a couple of whiskies shoved into my fist, and I can remember sitting on the wheel of 4K sometime later, patting the fuselage saying, "You did well, old girl." And that was the raid. But it was a very demoralised ship. You know, that literally nearly 3 squadrons. Old Gatey Smith, you know, that I spoke about, he, A, B and C, he was in A, landed safely on the aircraft. Nobody got any decoration in the first part, but a complaint was lodged, and all 6 officers that got back to the ship were given the DSC. Jackie, nothing. Such is the Navy.
So we buried the air gunner that was dead in the back on the deck. We buried him that night. And then some brilliant person at Admiralty or somewhere decided that we would do the same thing at Tromsø. And to do this, they amalgamated the serviceable aircraft of 827 and 828 and flew the one squadron of the Furious aircraft on board the Victorious. And they decided that we would then go and do exactly the same thing, a daylight raid on Tromsø, where no doubt the rest of us would have been rolled up, killed, or what have you. But I don't know what happened. I did hear all sorts of yarns about officers refusing to fly, but they were yarns. I can't say whether it was true or not, but in the event, this proposed raid on Tromsø was cancelled, and we came back to England.
The Hurricane, we had a Hurricane flight with us. If we'd had the Hurricanes with us in Kirkenes, they'd have had a ball. But they kept that to protect the carrier. So the Hurricanes never came anywhere near the fighting. I mean, they could have left the other fighters to guard the ship. And if we'd had those Hurricanes go, oh God, it would have been a different story.
And I mean, it's quite a shaking experience being shot down like that, but very depressed, because it was quite obvious, as we've been taken back in this minesweeper, that none of the ships in the harbour had been hit. None of the torpedoes went off. Not one of them, except when they hit the shore. So, I mean, we lost 11 aircraft out of 20, and the fighters lost 4 out of 12. Having achieved absolutely nothing. No, I think I must be honest about it. My morale was pretty damn low, and I think everybody else's was too. Furious only lost 4 aircraft. But again, their raid was disappointing because there weren't any ships in the harbour when they got there. So they dropped their torpedoes, which exploded against the quays. But in that case, of course, the duplex pistol fiasco didn't matter.
Right. I think back of all the epics of the fleet air of the Navy and what we did and achieved in the British Pacific Fleet, at a later stage, I get uptight.